Nothing's more scary than a school, am I right? Well, how about a basement? How about a basement in a school? How about a basement in a school with an unknown threat that keeps you locked inside, filling you with paranoia until eventually your life gets taken away? If that statement makes you a little curious, then stick around for this video because today we'll be exploring school rumors created by Beckett Wagner. To share a little bit more information about what this series is about, it takes a saying, "Curiosity kills the cat," and repeatedly shoves it in our faces. Believe me, there's so many deaths that happened in this school solely for the reason that people keep talking about the sealed-off basement, which sparks this intense interest to investigate it, and honestly, it's kind of natural selection. If you're going to do something dumb and reckless, expect to be consumed by a basement monster. With that, if you're interested to learn more about this series, I highly recommend checking out the videos first. Links are in the description, they're really cool and they're done with a lot of effort, but if you need more convincing, then sit back, relax, maybe get a snack, and as always, my name is Estrella. Let's explore. Number 0, found in the long unused basement of a Massachusetts high school. In the beginning of video 0, we see footage of someone inside a school building who immediately went straight towards the elevator while explaining to the viewers that they discovered something, an unused area under the STEM building of their school. That's exactly where the elevator took them, and the space appeared like it could have been used for extra storage. There were even 4 doors, which the protagonist begins to test which ones would open, and all but one were locked. Stepping inside, it revealed to be a dark and creepy hallway, which made the protagonist hesitate for a moment, but after turning his flashlight on, he began stepping inside. And while walking, he took note of the exit sign and even questioned the fact that the exit door from the first room was locked because, well, that's kind of a fire hazard, but regardless, he started testing out the handles on each of the doors he came across, and practically all of them were locked. But at least most were made with glass so he could peek inside, but eventually his flashlight started to act up, which drew his attention. He excused it as the light being cheap, or maybe he just hit the wrong setting, so ignoring that, he walks past other locked doors before reaching the end of the hallway, but sadly the exit door was also locked, making the tour of this strange place cut short. Left with no other options, he had to turn back, but suddenly he heard a creepy noise which made him pause for a moment, but eventually he brushed it off, assuming it was just an old pipe. Then suddenly his light started to act up, but again he made an excuse for it and kept going until he eventually returned to the elevator. It seemed like he was about to leave scot-free, however, once inside the elevator, it just refused to take him up. He was trapped on that floor. This was clearly frustrating, and he tried to wait for someone to eventually arrive and rescue him, but after an hour or so of doing nothing, he decided to brute force it by clicking all the buttons in the elevator. However, just like before, the elevator refuses to move. Not wanting to wait any longer, the protagonist returns to the creepy dark hallway to test the doors again, while also complaining that the power was not working in the area. But that's not the only thing he goes on to complain about. Once he checks all the doors, and later reluctantly returns back to the beginning where the elevator is, it turns out the door to that room was locked. This is obviously alarming since it didn't lock the first time he investigated the area, so he frantically began checking all the doors again to find a way out, but suddenly the mysterious noise from before returned, but it was much more noticeable and louder. The other concerning thing to happen next was his flashlight going out completely, so now he's stuck pacing back and forth in the dark hallway, trying to get any of the doors to open. Sadly, none of his efforts worked, but eventually, under the door cracks, he noticed that someone was in the room with the elevator. He of course tries calling out to them, but didn't get a response, so he then attempted to look under the crack. However, whoever was there, they're now gone. He now believes he's seeing things, and unexpectedly the sound of metal could be heard dropping in the hallway, but it was far more distorted than what you would expect metal to sound like. It even lasted longer than it should have. This was obviously unsettling to the protagonist, which they whispered to the camera that whatever that was, it clearly wasn't an old pipe. The video then ended with the camera battery dying and the protagonist repeatedly saying, "No." What's my takeaway from this video? I could say the cliche assumption and say that this could be a situation similar to the backrooms or a liminal space, but let me take this a step further and give a weird guess. You know the movie Monster House? What if this building is alive and it's keeping the protagonist trapped in that space? It could explain why we're hearing the sounds of metal and odd noises that could be connected to the sounds of old buildings. The basement is alive, and it's the stomach for the whole building? This is a weird guess, I know. In order to find out, let's now move on to the next video. Number 1. Security flaws. This video opens with unexpectedly a new protagonist who heard about the sealed-off basement in the school. According to the rumors, it was closed 15 to 20 years ago, but despite it being sealed, the new protagonist believes they found a way inside, and this is the purpose for why they're recording. You see, one day they opened a door to a utility or storage area, and inside was a long hallway with multiple doors, but the most important discovery was what was found at the end of the hallway. Behind furniture and a shelf was unexpectedly an elevator, which the protagonist decides to push the items aside to better access it, and once it was more more exposed. Noticeably, there was an out-of-service sign on the elevator. You'd think this would drive the protagonist away, but instead he threw caution out the window and used a bit of brute force to get the elevator doors to open, and he even managed to move it up to his floor. And once it arrived, noticeably it was pretty red inside, which unsettled me for some reason. But anyways, he entered the elevator and looked at the panel which one of the buttons were taped over. Removing the tape, it revealed the hidden floor, which was the basement, or specifically the visual arts floor. And despite the button appearing smashed up, it still worked, and after clicking it, the elevator started to move down. It of course took him to the basement, and after walking for a bit, the young man discovered another elevator, which was located in an oddly familiar area. It's the same storage room from video 0, but the main difference is the fact that the lights were off, the elevator doors no longer opened, and there was caution tape on the door that the first protagonist investigated. Speaking of which, this video's protagonist approaches that door, but before getting too close, he got distracted by the sounds of pipes. It spooked him for a moment, but he soon brushed it off so he could open the door, which luckily wasn't locked, and while walking down the dark hallway, unexpectedly, one of the doors were found slightly open. Obviously, the room was going to be investigated, and it was pretty dusty with a handful of old equipment, but a noteworthy discovery was a USB with writing that reads, "Basement Shutdown Notice. Draft 11/10. The numbers might indicate a date, but the protagonist decides not to think too much about it and puts the USB down. Then suddenly, odd noises could be heard in the hallway, and it progressively gets more intense the longer he stays. So he decided it was time to go, but on his way to the exit, the sound of metal could be heard behind him, and the protagonist begins to freak out before suddenly the footage starts to cut and corrupt, showing glimpses of what happened, but still leaving us with a lot of questions. And that's where the video ends. What's my takeaway? I'm suspicious of the pipes because there's a clear emphasis on drawing our attention to it, but besides that, let's pause on crafting any theories and move on to the next video. Number 2. A student explores his high school's basement. Just like in the previous videos, we seem to have a new protagonist who lets his curiosity get the best of him, especially after discovering an out-of-order elevator. Instead of leaving it alone, he managed to get his hands on a key for the maintenance room and plans to make the elevator work again by accessing the room with the switches. He succeeded in this endeavor and managed to turn on the elevator so he could take it to the basement. Okay, quick pause. Honestly, at this point, I'm starting to see a trend. It's almost like there's a switch going on in people's brains, making them want to go down there and doing reckless things just to have access to the space. Yes, there's many curious people in the world, but usually a sane person will look at an out-of-order sign and leave it alone, but these people aren't. Why is that? And they're all recording, so I feel like there's some weird influence making them do what they do. But enough with the speculation. Now in the basement, our new protagonist discovers that the majority of the doors in that familiar space were locked, except for the one that the past two protagonists explored, which still has the caution tape, however pushed to the side. That door, of course, will soon be opened, and this video's protagonist will go on to explore the area. While walking down the hall, he discovered an abandoned shoe and a few items tipped over. There was even a house centipede, which of course was disgusting, but he kept pushing forward and noticed a panel from the ceiling on the ground, clearly showing that this area was run down. After this, he entered the only room that was unlocked, and inside he first noticed floppy disks before getting distracted by a mysterious noise that could be heard outside. This startled the protagonist enough for him to want to leave, but as you can probably guess what happens next, the exit door is now locked. This of course freaked out the protagonist, and even with his master key, the door refuses to open. So he resorted to pulling the fire alarm, however, nothing happened. Strange noises then started to follow behind him, and he tried calling out for help, but obviously no one replies. Banging could then be heard, and our protagonist starts to run away from something, and it seems like he manages to push one of the doors open. However, he was still stuck in the basement, and when he turns back to see the door behind him open wider, suddenly it jump cuts to a view of a hand that's bloody, with the sound of crunching, I believe, and the video ends. Yeah, I don't think he survived that investigation either. Ugh. Clearly this place is locked away for a reason, and it has something to do with whatever is attacking these poor souls. Curiosity killed the cat, huh? Now let's move on. Hopefully one of these explorers will survive. Number 3. Going off the beaten path. This video's protagonist starts in the art room, to which he finds the same storage area that one of our previous protagonists already discovered. I'm talking about the one who messed with the elevator and used brute force to get it to start working again. Speaking of which, now that it's working, this protagonist felt inclined to take the trip to the basement since it was so easy. Once in the basement, he started to walk forward and he arrived at an oh-so-familiar location we've seen many times before, and you guessed it, he was soon locked inside. This of course sucked, and left him with no other options, he had to push forward, but this protagonist has proven himself to be at least the tiniest bit more smarter than the previous ones because he put a door stopper on the door that leads to the suspicious hallway. So how long will that work and keep him safe? Who knows? Anyways, he discovered the abandoned shoe just like the previous protagonist did, then he noticed the pulled fire alarm along with objects scattered on the ground. After this, strange noises could be heard, and he briefly zoomed in on something at the end of the corridor on the ceiling, which provoked him to start running, and a bang could be heard from that direction. Sadly, he ends up tripping on one of the objects on the floor. However, it turns out this was a good thing because it helped him remember that he has a flip phone on hand. Yeah, smartest protagonist so far. Anyways, he was going to call for help, however his phone just refuses to work, so he tries running back to the first door, but unexpectedly the door stopper was gone, meaning he's now locked in. Wow, how useful. And despite this, he wasn't just going to walk back and encounter that strange thing on the ceiling again, so instead he took a few steps back so he could run into the door and hopefully break it open. However, before he could run into the door, tendrils and dark vine-like things started to spread from the cracks, and the video ends with a dark screen. We can probably guess he didn't survive either. Ugh. Regardless, I'm happy to see the threat a little more clearly now. Suspicious looking lines, maybe wires. What an interesting foe hidden in the basement. Let's now move on to the next video. Number 4. Student Disappearances. New protagonist, same curiosity, finding an out-of-order elevator that turns out to actually work, and it gets taken to the basement. And while taking the elevator down, this video's protagonist actually shares some pretty interesting information. The art center, which is the area that he's in, was not the best constructed, and there was so many problems with plumbing and electricity in the basement. Because of this, it got too expensive to fix, so it was decided to only prioritize the upper floors and seal off the bottom, and that's why the basement is closed off. At least that's what he heard. But anyways, now in the basement, he of course goes to the room with a ripped caution tape and discovers many of the things we've seen before. He also realizes that a handful of the doors were locked, but he knows how to pick them with a paperclip. He successfully gets into one of the rooms and immediately points out how disgusting it smells inside. But regardless, he still investigates inside and discovers some documents and papers. Water Shutoff Warning, Notice to Repair was one of the titles of these papers, and in the paper it goes on to explain that the water is not safe to drink and that the town will shut off the school's water until they have a plan of action to remedy the issue. Following this discovery, a non-noise could be heard, which of course makes the protagonist want to leave, but say it with me, he's now locked inside. He tries to keep a level head, but the noises all around him aren't helping, so he soon goes on to pick a lock on a door. The door leads to a maintenance area to which he spots a vent on the wall that he climbs into. However, it still feels like the mysterious noises are following behind him, so he needs to crawl fast. Eventually, he gets out of the crawl space, but it was still a tight squeeze where he's at. Then eventually, he arrives at a underground tunnel area with pipes lining the walls. And if you remember what I said before, there seems to be an emphasis on pipes, so it's kind of concerning, especially after discovering the documents mentioning water problems. But anyways, a loud noise could be heard behind him, which was followed by his screams after he dropped his light, and the footage then cuts to a view of a blurry ground before the video ends. As for any of my main takeaways, someone in the comment section made a joke about this being like an infinite respawn situation, meaning maybe there aren't multiple protagonists but just the one who keeps resetting in different situations and without memories. If that's the case, what a horrible existence. But that's just a crack theory, and honestly, I mainly believe the fact that there are multiple people going missing because that just makes a little more sense in my head. But besides that, with the whole emphasis on drawing our attention to the pipes and the fact that there's water problems, maybe whatever's causing damage to the water are these strange tendril things that we've seen before, and they decided to take shelter in the basement, and whoever goes in there becomes food for them. But that's just another assumption, so let's now move on to the next video to get more information. Number 5. Growth and Movement. The video opens with our new protagonist in the auditorium who discovered how to enter a sealed-off area, which is the basement. By going to the emergency exit of the auditorium, there's a closet next to the staircase, and inside is a wall with a panel that opens to a vent. He of course crawls inside and manages to bust his way into the basement since the vent was actually a crawl space for the basement's ceiling. So with a bit of brute force, he was able to jump down and explore the area. And just like the previous protagonist, he ends up in the same familiar room and opens the same door with the caution tape. Everything seems pretty much the same, but the one thing that caught the protagonist off guard was that in one of the rooms, someone was standing inside. Joking, it's actually just a coat hanger holding a blue coat, but it did jump scare me, so hey, good on ya. Speaking of jump scares, well actually it's not a jump scare, but it's still unsettling. The protagonist soon turns the corner and sees at the end of the hallway tendrils/dark lines spreading on the wall, which of course made him turn back, not wanting to investigate any further. And as he starts to run, metal could be heard behind him, and for some reason I thought he was going to be locked in the hallway just like the previous protagonists, but he manages to get out, and he soon reaches the familiar elevator with the red floor. He gets inside and starts frantically pressing the buttons, and shockingly, the elevator took him up. Sadly, it wasn't that easy because the power in the elevator went out and now he's stuck inside of it. He tries prying the doors open, but that wasn't met with much success, so instead he busted through the ceiling hatch so he could climb onto the roof of the elevator. The switch for the elevator was luckily still up there, and he pressed the up button, but unexpectedly his foot soon got caught by something, and once the elevator started to move up, he begins to scream, and maybe something was holding on to him, but to say how it ends, eventually he went silent and the elevator reached its destination. Kind of brutal. I feel like the constant life lesson we're getting told with each video is to obviously not stick our noses where they shouldn't be. Also, who the frick put that blue coat there? I mean, like, it wasn't there before, right? Did the basement monster do that? Whatever, let's now move on to the next video. Number 6. Message received. In this video, of course, we get a fresh new protagonist, and they begin to explain that they believe the school will be shutting down soon, and that many parents are withdrawing their children because they don't want to send their kids there anymore. The reason why is because a total of 6 students disappeared, which is obviously alarming, and I believe this is confirmation that this isn't a reset cycle situation. But anyways, excuses were made for those disappearances, but the protagonist believes that the school knows more than what they're letting on. He believes they're trying to cover themselves, and he then talks about the basement, which was sealed 30 years ago. Somehow he learned that there were plumbing issues and that the school decided to seal off the area rather than fixing it. He's also aware that there's an elevator or two that can lead people to the basement, and he has a suspicion that that's how most students are getting trapped there. He's surprisingly spot on with his theories, and he goes on to film the elevator that he mentioned before for the sake of closure, since the school will be closing soon, and once the elevator doors opened, he was greeted with a foul smell that made him step back. With such a reaction, you'd think this would make him leave, but again, curiosity gets the best of humanity, and he goes into the elevator and takes it down. And once in the basement, he texts his friend Beckett about the fact that the elevator works, and then he goes to that familiar room and hallway we've seen many times. And at least this protagonist has more of a goal for why he's down there. Rather than just exploring for the sake of exploring, he's taking photos as proof or evidence of his findings. For example, the abandoned shoe. But the most noteworthy piece of evidence is actually those tendrils on the walls, and after snapping a quick photo, suspicious noises could be heard up ahead, which of course made the protagonist run and hide inside the closest room. He then tries calling someone on his phone, but just like the other protagonists we've seen a while back, his phone didn't work either for contacting someone outside. Left with no other options, he hopped on top of the room's piano and busted through the ceiling to climb up into. Sadly, Lady Luck is not on his side because he ends up getting punctured by a nail, and the ceiling then breaks, which causes him to fall back into the hallway. It was pretty nasty, and it kind of makes you feel really bad for the guy. Anyways, he eventually gets attacked, and in the final moments of the video, we see a shoe on the ground along with red tendrils or wires along with blood that's pouring off to the side. Hey, have I ever mentioned that the unknown freaks me out? I'm pretty sure I have. Anyways, the fact that we never see who or what attacks these guys unsettles me. All we know about this threat is that they make mysterious metal pipe noises, and that it leaves tendrils on the walls. Do these tendrils wrap around their victims and choke them out? Or suck their insides? Or is there something more beastly that's attached to these tendrils? Usually I'm scared to look at a monster, but not knowing what it fully looks like makes it 10 times more scary. Let's now move on to the next video. Number 7. Emergency Exit. This is the final video in the playlist, and it opens with our new protagonist waiting for his friend in the art studio, and it's long past school hours. The reason why he's there is because the two were planning to do something stupid, and as you can probably guess, it involves the basement. As for who his friend is, we can likely assume it was the protagonist from the previous video, because he did text someone about the elevator working, and this video's protagonist showed us their text messages. But anyways, as we already know from the previous video, while in the basement, communicating with someone outside is practically impossible, which this protagonist mentioned that any new messages for some reason couldn't go through. So to figure out what happened, our new protagonist decides to go check out the elevator. So this is kind of a rescue mission. By the way, since in the previous video, our last protagonist mentioned that his friend's name is Beckett, coincidentally the same name as the channel, meaning I can finally stop saying protagonist when talking about the cameraman. Now Beckett enters the smelly elevator and takes it down to the basement, to which he immediately starts calling out to Brody, his friend and our previous protagonist, and while walking, he found a familiar to us flip phone and a few cameras, to which he takes the SD cards. More on that later, because he soon goes on to enter a bathroom with a wet floor, a tool bag, and 2 papers discussing the water problems. But there wasn't time to focus on that because strange noises could be heard outside of the room, which made Beckett freeze for a moment before eventually stepping outside. He tries calling out to Brody again, but that's when metal noises could be heard behind him, which of course made Beckett pick up the speed, and when he found an exit, it made him excited, but obviously it was locked. He's now in that familiar room with the non-working elevator, but but he doesn't stay for long and goes to that familiar dark hallway, still trying to find his friend, when suddenly he discovers Brody's abandoned phone that was broken on the ground. This really tanked Beckett's mood, but it soon gets worse when the door behind him opened and it was followed by odd metal noises. Beckett of course ran away from that and entered a room for safety. As for the thing chasing him, it started banging on the closed door, so Beckett had to grab something for protection, which he found scissors, but he also discovered a cabinet with tape that reads, "Emergency breaker inside." Beckett of course started messing with the breaker and probably got shocked in the process, but it was worth it because now the fire alarm works and the fire exits should unlock. However, once he reached the room with the elevator, it was clear that he was still stuck. The tendrils then started to spread into the room and even managed to attack Beckett by latching itself onto his hand, but he soon ripped it out, then grabbed a hidden crowbar which was found in the room and used it to pry the door open. It worked and he climbed up some stairs which led him outside of the building. You heard me right, he's free and didn't die! Woo! Finally a protagonist that lives! And in the final moments of the video, we see him running away from the school as police sirens could be heard in the distance since, you know, the fire alarm is active. How cool! Now it's time to go to the conclusion. Let's go! Conclusion. Now, there's still a lot of mysteries revolving around this story, but we were still given a decent amount of information to make assumptions about what happened. When the school was first being built or when renovations were being done, something got into the basement of the STEM building and caused problems with the water system. And if I had to guess, it likely took shelter in the pipes which polluted it, and that's how it specifically happened. Or maybe the threat was moving all around the school through the pipes, and with a bit of brute force, the school managed to lock the threat in the basement by cutting its access outside of the area, and that's why it's sealed, to prevent it from spreading all around the school. Whatever the case is, at some point maybe there was an attempt to get rid of the threat, but it probably caused many casualties, so instead of trying to exterminate this odd threat, it was decided to let the monster stay and have the place to itself. The downside to this is now rumors are spreading over the years about this unused area in the school, which drives the curiosity of reckless and adventurous students wild. They have to go down there because untouched territory is too tempting. Also, I'm just going to throw this out there, maybe there's an odd force making people want to go down there. It could be paranormal or maybe just something in the air. One person, I can understand that. Two, sure. 3+ people? It has to be more than just a coincidence, so it has to be foul play. The monster has to be luring these people and tempting them to go down there and do whatever it takes just to reach the basement. But anyways, this creature obviously takes advantage of humanity's curiosity for personal gain, and based on what we've observed, I believe the monster is consuming the students and not just hunting them for sport. But for some reason, I believe it's more complicated than how it sounds. I believe the monster not only feeds off the person's body, but their emotions too. I feel like it feeds off of their curiosity and fear. Maybe mostly curiosity, their sense of adventure too. Now the reason why I'm saying this is because what do all the other protagonists have in common besides death that's so different from Beckett? It's the fact that they all went to the basement because they were curious about it. Beckett on the other hand wasn't interested in the basement. It was Brody who was interested, and the only reason why Beckett went down there is because he wanted to find his friend, not explore the unfamiliar space. And listen, we see the tendrils latch onto Beckett, so why wasn't he further attacked like the others? Maybe he wasn't satisfying enough, so the tendrils didn't see a point to puncture and attach to him any further. Also, I believe these tendrils like to marinate their prey since they don't attack right away, and they seem to unsettle and make their prey paranoid before attacking, and that's why I suspect fear is also something they enjoy feasting on, but I'm not 100% sure since Beckett was also pretty scared at moments. He may have a fighting spirit, but a few of the other protagonists were pretty determined to live and escape too, so why did the tendrils just not consume him? It's because he was just never there for them, or their territory. He didn't want to go to the basement, he was looking for his friend. But besides that, what else can we gather from this threat? Well, it seems to always leave a foul smell behind for where it last attacked a person. Maybe it sucks a person dry like a vampire and the human remains are stuck on the pipes and walls in the area, which is why the smell is so prominent. Masking that smell isn't easy, so it will obviously leave the smell of death. Ugh. Anyways, what else? Well, it seems to have become one with the basement space, spreading on the walls and popping out from the cracks, but I don't think the threat is fully the basement. We don't know what it looks like besides the tendrils, and if I had to guess, maybe it's just a slippery, fast creature that can travel fast in that space, and maybe there's more than one, like a network of creepy vines. I'm not confident, but that's my main assumption at the moment. Or, my second guess, is that maybe it's a similar case to a spider. The basement is like its webs, and the tendrils can do the trapping and sucking. Ew. If that's the case, then we truly don't know what the monster looks like since the tendrils is doing all the hard work. Ugh. You know what? I'll stop before I start confusing myself. Actually, speaking of confusion, who put up the caution tape and blue coat? The caution tape confuses me because wouldn't the monster want people to go in there further? And the blue coat, well, that's just random. Fun and spooky, but random. Whatever. Now a handful of students are missing and the school will be closing soon because the parents are rightfully taking their children away from that potential death trap. As for the government, I guess they don't care about this potential monster, or maybe they were just never made aware of it. The town did threaten to cut off the water supply, but that's all that was done for outside interference. So, man. Also, since we see Beckett grab all those SD cards from the abandoned cameras, that explains how he got his hands on all that footage and how he was able to upload them. He was the survivor with the evidence, so it makes sense. And with that, this was School Rumors created by Beckett Wagner. Links are in the description. Now, what's today's lesson? Don't pay attention to rumors, and if people are going missing after investigating the same place, maybe don't investigate it. Yeah. Anyway, since you made it this far, I hope that means you enjoyed the video, so please don't forget to like, subscribe, do that funny little notification thing, maybe follow my other social medias, leave a comment, and I better not catch you dying on me. Goodbye!